All right, welcome everybody to session 2 of the GM support group. We are here today. We'll do a brief introduction, same people as last week, but if you are new to watching us, we'll go ahead and get to it. So if we want to start in the top left, Rob, why don't you... Actually, I'll just give brief introductions. We don't need to go through everything again. Top left, we have Rob. Top right, Fizzer. I am Steven. And in the bottom right is Walker. And today we're going to be discussing 3 more subjects relating to running RPGs. I think on average the most of us are most familiar with D&D, so a lot of the conversation relates to that. But today in particular we will be discussing at the end of the session some RPGs outside of Dungeons & Dragons that we find enjoyable, either that we've run before and want to run again, or just want to run, period. So, to get started in this behind-the-screen segment of our show, we're going to be talking about house rules. So, does everyone have a D20 ready? I think we're just going to do this for all segments and roll for initiative to see who goes first.
D20.
All right, roll for it.
Rip. Natural 2.
Natural 4.
Hey, same.
All right, and Fizzer, what do you have?
8.
8. It looks like you won.
No one rolled above a 10.
That's on brand. All right.
Wonderful.
So, Fizzer,
In the land of the single digits.
Yeah. If you want to discuss what sort of house rules that you have had in the past, if there's any sort of house rules you want to use in the future, or there's something you've been thinking about, use us as your sounding board.
Yeah. So a lot of the house rules I've done have been for what's called the cipher system, which is particularly moddable instead of 5e. But I have picked up some things from what I've done there and ported them over to 5th edition. I think the first and most expansive house rule I've done has been a looting and like scavenging system, which is like based on how well you look at a region and take maybe half a day to root around in the wreckage of a civilization or the ruins of an ancient tower. I have honestly, it's too expansive. A bunch of different tables that cascade off of what you're looking for, how you're looking for it, and then it just kind of keeps growing. And occasionally I'll cut off and say, all right, I don't need to roll all of this. It makes sense in this area for you to find this thing. But I found that a lot of players like the kind of like random chance aspect of, oh man, I wonder what I'm going to get on this roll table. And occasionally it's really interesting. Occasionally it's just a really funny goof, where someone keeps picking up basically the same item in different locations and saying like, why do I keep finding like a broken axe handle? It's always broken right here. And every once in a while, either something is dragging a little bit or maybe it just completely throws off the rest of the session. I have a series of like major discoveries hidden deep in the roll tables that at least on 2 occasions have taken a session that was just simple as, hey, we've had a couple of tribes come and like harass farmers on the edge of this terrain, go and like either scare them off or talk to them, turn into, well, we're about a mile underneath the Earth's crust, and 2 of us have contracted some kind of wasting disease that is slowly turning us into robots. What a Monday, right?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I think a lot of us tend to like our random loot tables, and it seems like you've taken that definitely further than I've seen it done, and it seems like it fits from what I know of Numenera for something like that. So yeah, any other?
But I have one more thing, and this is what I'd like a feedback on. I've been trying this in my recent D&D game. The idea is you find a magical item that's kind of underpowered, right? But that magical item has some kind of intrinsic connection to your character, and it becomes what I'm calling like a legacy item. As you invest more time in it, it grows in power. So to like gate how quickly you access the rest of this item's power, I have basically research pips that you tick off before you unlock to the next step of whatever it is.
That's pretty good. I actually used a system that I found on the DM's Guild called Ancestral Weapons for my campaign. One of our characters had a glaive that he used for the entire game and wasn't really interested in using a weapon other than a glaive. And so it became the glaive of his former master, who gave it to him on his death. And as his character grew, he unlocked points that he could use to basically awaken aspects of the glaive. So that sounds pretty similar, and that's if that it seems pretty similar to what you're doing based on your description. So I definitely recommend you take a look at those ancestral weapons.
Yeah, I'll see if I can pull anything from them.
What was it? For Rob, actually, I gave you with my campaign an item from your god, the hammer,
The hammer,
that was set up to grow with your character. And since we're using
Hmm.
milestones instead of experience points for leveling up characters,
Mhm.
I gave your hammer a couple of milestones that would reach as you grew. That
Gotcha,
way, it stays relatively tied to your character level, and you don't get something
Mhm.
that's overpowered or underpowered
Mhm.
depending on where you are in your progression.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I remember that.
like that because
Yeah.
it gives you a little bit more control. Because the thing about the research pips is if they just spend all of their time researching, suddenly they have a super overpowered weapon that they may not be ready for, or you may not be ready for.
That is true, something to watch out for, and I guess that depends on the type of player you have.
Right.
But that all sounds like some pretty interesting house rule stuff. Walker, we both rolled 4s, so shall we roll off again?
Why not?
Who has the
Might as
higher
well.
dexterity?
That'd be Walker. All right, I rolled nice middle of the ground. Rotate 10.
That'd be a natural 20.
All right, it looks like you get to go next.
Alrighty. So, one of the house rules that I very much enjoy that I've used in most of the campaigns I've run are critical successes and critical failures, and having a kind of chart to run off of getting one end or the other. And you don't use it for absolutely everything because sometimes it just doesn't fit based on what you're doing, but it can really add a lot of flavor to combat or investigation or various different scenarios where you do so well it brings you above and beyond anything that you were expecting for, or you do so badly everybody kind of has to stop for a minute and think, oh shit, what do we do now?
Right.
So I know Fantasy Grounds is a built-in one that I've used a little bit, and some of my favorite ones are suddenly you're disarmed, your weapon is out of your reach, gets stuck in something, and various other ones with combat. If you do critical success, maybe you'll add an extra die. Maybe they have disadvantage on the next turn based on what they're trying to attack somebody. Little things like that that give you. It makes it feel like you're doing it, and then the flavor of it is the way you describe what they're doing. And I really very much enjoy giving descriptions of you do something so well, like you took advantage of a little thing that you noticed in their a weakness in their defenses. You saw a way to slip past their shield and get in right behind them where they weren't expecting it, and it caused this wonderful effect. And then in outside of combat, I like having it be something where I can reward them for doing very well with what they're trying to do and give them a little bit extra information, maybe give them extra money or extra items if they're trying to trade, or take that away from them if they do particularly badly and they've been making a habit of it. And it's a good way to give the risk reward to players as you're playing and keep track of if they're doing very well and you like what they're contributing to your campaign, you can reward them more easily, and you can also punish those that are hampering the campaign, although I don't like putting it quite that way.
Yeah, I remember in playing in your game, granted it's been a little while now, but
Yeah.
I remember your descriptions of things were some of the best I've heard as far as running the game goes, and I definitely see what you're talking about. Although a lot of that stuff is subtle enough that only looking back is it a little more obvious.
Right.
But yeah. Any other sort of house rules you tend to use?
There's one that I've been thinking about trying to port over from the Call of Cthulhu system, and that's the levels of successes. And I'll talk about the levels of successes when we get to that segment later, but it's kind of going with the critical success and critical fail, having a contested check between two characters or two forces going against each other, depending on how well you roll compared to them, determines how well the result is. And like for the Call of Cthulhu system makes sense because you have to roll underneath a certain amount for your skill level to do well on something.
Right.
And the lower you roll, the better you do. So if let's say you rolled a 1 on a percentile dice and someone else rolled a 70, you succeeded much, much better than they did, and you because of that, it goes much more in your direction.
Mm.
I'm trying to think of a decent way to do that in D&D where you're rolling a D20, and it's kind of difficult because it doesn't scale quite the right way.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's something to think about. Maybe that's something we can all think about for the rest of the session and come back to it towards the end if anybody's thought of anything interesting for that.
Yeah.
Porting over some form of variable success based on rolls like that.
Yeah, it'd definitely be hard to do something like that because, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is like a grapple check, right?
Mhm.
Those
Right.
generally are contested strengths once like target is grappled to break away or something along those lines.
Right.
And so, like a partial success, like how would a partial success work with
Yeah.
something like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's less geared towards combat and more towards an extended task. Like if they're
Mm.
trying to do something particularly difficult that will take a number of rolls,
Mhm.
and there's someone actively opposing them on the other side.
Gotcha.
And that's kind
Yeah.
of the situation I'm thinking of, where basically you have two groups trying to accomplish opposing goals, and you want to see the right way to weight who's doing better and how much better they're doing.
hmm
So I've been trying to think of a good way to kind of put that in there, but percentile dice are easier than a d20 for that.
Yeah.
Much more granular, yeah. I've got an idea, but I'll think on it before we come back to it.
Okay.
All right. Well, since I guess I rolled the 4 and a 10. So one of the house rules I've used, and this is something that I guess only relates when you're playing in person, and Rob and Walker, you might remember this. I don't know if it came up in our game Fizzer, but when you roll a die and it accidentally falls off the table, and it has to be an accident. If you accidentally have it fall off the table, it doesn't count. But you can either take the value that was rolled on the floor or re-roll the die, and that's it always sucks having to go scrounging around on the floor to find whatever die you dropped. So that's something that I've liked to do to make that a little more entertaining. But that's one that I've sort of transitioned away from as we've moved to online gaming in the last few years for our group because there's no way to handle that. But one of the other house rules that I use regularly is rules for upper level potions. They tend to cost a lot, especially in D&D games, and they should. They're powerful one-use items. But I've come up with a system that will let players and their characters try and find the right ingredients, and that significantly drops the amount of A, time that is required to make the potion, and B, cost. And I have it scaled. I think it starts out for rare potions. You can decrease the time and cost by 10%, by 10 times, because it's generally a pretty large number. For very rare, it's 50 times, and for legendary, it's 100 times. And that seems to be about the right level from the little bit of testing we did in my campaign towards the end. But that's something I've been working with. And then I think the last thing I wanted to talk about with my house rules, I've been thinking about my next campaign, whenever that may happen, and my characters are probably going to be leaving the continent around 5th level, and I'm not super fond of the ship combat system. So I'm going to be porting over, or I'm going to be trying to port over the ship combat from Star Trek Adventures. And that's something I'll be talking about a little bit in our last segment as well, because I really, really like the way that ship combat works in Star Trek Adventures. But
Pathfinder has a huge ocean combat scene. Yeah.
That's not something I've dug into very much, but I'll definitely take a
Pathfinder
look at
has rules for everything.
yeah.
I'm interested to see. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I'll throw out that Stars Without Number is also built on like the OSR idea, so it has like all the same stats as D&D. Well, at least as a baseline. I think second edition changes it up, but they have a like starship combat, and the framework for that is actually pretty simple and elegant, but it also allows everybody on board to engage in it some way.
Right.
Yeah, I'm
It's also
interested
free.
to see. Wonderful.
That helps.
I'm interested to see how you get the different ship subsystems into a sailing ship.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. Hull is obviously the easy one.
Right.
Most of the shots are going to be taken to the hull, and if they
Weapon
want to try
system.
firing at the mast, then that acts like the engine. If they want to fire at communications, obviously doesn't really work very well, and that's not going to happen.
Right.
But
Just
they
shoot
can
at the one
aim
guy
their
who can
shots. Yeah, they can
Yeah.
aim their shots at the cannons and hopefully reduce the amount of weapons that can be brought to bear upon them. Things like that. And I
if
think
it's properly age of sail, then having somebody like in charge of like tack against the wind,
true.
could take the place of engines.
Yeah, that's true. The first officer is often the one who's giving the commands. Hoist the mainsail or whatever. I don't know anything
Right.
about ships, but
And it's
Yeah.
similar to the way Star Trek Adventures works, where you got the one con officer.
Right.
You're not sitting all around in one area. You're wherever you are in the ship,
Mhm.
controlling your stuff.
yeah.
That'll be really interesting to see what you come up with there.
I'm looking forward to that. It's something that I think I can get to work right, and I've got enough time. Hopefully before my next campaign starts, unless Rob, you manage to kill us all next week, which is always a possibility. But Rob,
So there's a high possibility if you guys
yeah,
do some stupid things.
Rob, any house rules that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, you guys obviously know some of them. For me, I enjoy making D&D a bit challenging for the player. So one house rule that we've adopted for this particular campaign with 5e, in particular with death saves. So generally, anytime that you go down, you start rolling death saves, but then as soon as you get brought back up, your death saves reset, right? But we have adopted the a part of the gritty realism kind of aspect of things, and death saves no longer reset until you have a short rest. So there are a couple metagaming type of things in 5e where a druid basically would sit there with 10 good berries, wait for their person to go down, feed them a good berry. Right before their turn starts, they come back up with 1 hit point, they get to act, and then they go back down next turn. And so they basically this up, down, up, down, up, down mechanic of things, which this helps kind of prevent that and kind of means, and you have to spend a bit more time making sure you're positioned correctly. Your cleric has to actually keep you up rather than bring you back up. And so it helps expend resources a bit more as well, because 5e is generally based off of 2 to 3 medium combat scenarios and then 1 larger combat scenario, which, I mean, most of us can probably agree in 5e that almost never happens.
Yeah.
You have some traps or some minor combat things and then 1 big combat thing. And so it's always a challenge to have your players use their resources so that you don't have to keep scaling your monsters incredibly high.
Right.
And so something like this requires players to kind of get into that mindset of don't go down, because you might not come back up next time, right?
And I do really like that house rule. Actually, it brings just enough extra difficulty that I might adopt it for my next game. Depending, we haven't had a character death yet, so we'll see how I feel after that.
We've been close. Styles was close last week.
Yep.
Literally just how the dice rolled. He had enough to kill you, but you lived with enough hit points. Yeah, that was rough.
Barely.
I think it was 2 hit points. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second house rule, kind of going with the crit fails, crit success, is that we've adopted is for ability checks. So, for instance, if someone casts a fireball on you and you roll a natural 20, instead of taking half damage, you take 0 damage. As a crit success. Mind you, that works for both ways, both parties, enemies and friendlies. So if the enemy rolls a nat 20 on the fireball that you cast, they also take no damage, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we've actually run into it. Technically, the house rule is as well that if you roll a natural 1, you take double damage. But we actually haven't run into that scenario.
We haven't
yet.
No.
Luckily.
Yeah.
Luckily, as many times as Styles has gone off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Can I
Wild
add
magic.
something? Considering the natural 20 one modification on ability checks has come out twice now. In Numenera and the Cipher system, there's actually a codified section of the rules for how to deal with that, because it's also a D20 system.
Right.
And they're called minor and major effects. Basically, on natural 20, you get either +4 damage. It's a different damage scale in that game, but you get either an extra damage or you get a major effect, and that's something that is either unexpected or moves you forward some way or brings in something that could be seen as positive. It's essentially a prompt to the game master to say, hey, time to improv a little bit and spin it towards your players. And the converse is true on natural 1, which is what's called a GM intrusion. Something maybe not negative, but something happens that no one is expecting. And maybe it's, your sword gets stuck in something and you can't pull it out in time. Or maybe when you hit this thing and you can change what would be a miss into a hit with that 1. You hit and you deal your damage, but when you rip open like the chest of this automaton that you're fighting, all of a sudden smaller automatons come out and start swarming you. You weren't expecting that. The GM wasn't expecting that, but the dice have added a little bit of a narrative element to help pep it up and keep combat more interesting.
That would be an
Kinda
interesting
sounds
thing.
like the Star Trek point. What was the point system for Star Trek where the GM
threats,
could use
the threat system.
threat?
Yeah. That's definitely something
you
that
could
could be
spin
interesting.
threat to choose from the table, right?
Right.
Yeah. I definitely like that. I'll look into that because it sounds kind of similar to what I like doing. So having more options with that would be wonderful.
Walker, I think that definitely sounds like something that would have fit very well into your campaign from the 7 levels we did before we had to wrap things
Somewhere
up.
around there, yeah.
Yeah.
We played that one for a while too.
Yep.
I highly recommend that system. I used that in D&D 5e, and I honestly forgot until right now that wasn't a D&D rule. It was a Cipher rule.
It seems like it would fit very well, so yeah. Well, those are all great house rules. And I think it's probably time for us to get into our next section, so let's head away from the table. All right, so our next segment is dealing with online play, which is not a particularly fun topic at the moment. Although I will say, for clarification, Rob Walker and I have been dealing with online play for about 2 years, a little over 2 years.
A little more.
I think we're reaching 2.5.
2 years and a few months, coming up on 2.5. Yeah. I think we played our last game in April of 2018 together, and then we didn't play again until June of 2018. Something like that.
Yeah, it was right before finals.
Yeah. But in our current times, which we're not going to get too much into just because we don't want this to be a downer of a session, a lot of people have moved to online play for very obvious reasons. So we wanted to discuss a little bit about what that sort of transition from in-person to online looks like and how we deal with it. So just like for the last segment, we're going to roll initiative and see who's going to talk first.
Natural 19.
An 11.
12.
14.
All right, Rob. Last to talk in the last segment and first to talk here.
Yeah. So, virtual tabletops. Of course, I personally am a Fantasy Grounds fanboy. I've actually talked to the creator of Fantasy Grounds and on Discord and things like that. And their new Unity system is probably one of the best systems there are out there in terms of ease of use, and especially for the amount of money that you have to pay. Of course, there's Roll20, where they do offer a free version, but you don't get all the the same added benefits. But in terms of virtual tabletops, there's a lot of things that I enjoy about them more than just sitting at the table. Such as the automated calculations for all your ability stats, and the drag and drop system of Fantasy Grounds, which is very modular, makes leveling up extremely easy in terms of 5e and things like that. What else? I mean, there's so many things I could talk about Fantasy Grounds. It's completely community based, so you have a lot of third party tools that you can add in, and we just add in a stat tracker, right, for our game. I mean, Growthar has already healed 61 hit points, right?
Yeah.
So there's leveraging the power of technology definitely comes into and it can help quite a lot, you know. But that being said, something that we have, or at least my group has adopted, is that we all bought webcams so that we can maybe get a little bit of that in-person feel.
And that was nice, really just in the last couple of weeks. I don't know why we didn't do it sooner.
Just an accident, right? Like, I mean, me and Steven had a webcam, and then Walker got one. And then
so on and so
Mike
forth.
got one, and so on and so forth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
it actually started with this when we did our first session of the GM support group. I think we really realized that
it makes
adds a lot being able to see the other person. And then the game that you ran, the Star Trek game, where we had everybody that we could kind of see. I definitely enjoyed that.
Yeah. And so we have been adopting some of the around the table settings, you know, even though we're far away. But yeah, I mean, I personally enjoy tabletop virtual tabletops. That being said, maybe next year, I know a couple of us have talked about maybe buying some plane tickets and having a all-in-one weekend kind of playing some D&D and having fun in Colorado or California or wherever, you know. So it should be a good time.
All right, so who rolled the next highest?
I think it's Walker.
Yeah, I think so, with the 14.
Yeah, that would be you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with Rob here with the Fantasy Grounds being a wonderful system that makes online playing so much easier, especially with Fantasy Grounds, or not Fantasy Grounds, Unity. The one thing that's really good about it is you can run literally any tabletop system through it, and there's modules you can find to make it easier for yourselves. It takes a lot of the hard work out of it, where it automatically handles dice rolls, adding die to rolls, adding modifiers, doing saves automatically for everybody affected by something. It speeds up the slow parts of the game so you can be more focused on the story, which I very much enjoy. It also it kind of helps me for organizing as a GM notes and encounters and all of that, because the built-in system lets you make parcels for rewards for an encounter. You can save all the creatures in an encounter on a little screen up here with a map where you just drop them in, they populate. And the new change with Unity is now there's walls and doors and all of that, so you can actually hide your creatures on the map. Yeah, and then when they open the door, suddenly there's a thing hiding in the room, and then you see it now. So
yeah, the first dungeon we went through with that you made, Rob, was fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it worked out pretty well. There's some minor kinks with the portals or whatever that we had.
Yeah, but that's not even.
But it wasn't. That was a third party mod. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, no, the line of sight thing, them adding that into it was life changing.
And that's why I like. I know a couple of times we played in person, I used Fantasy Grounds even while we were there to help manage those sorts of things. So even as we get to the tail end of this pandemic, it's something that I know that I will continue to use, because it makes all of the little things of D&D a little bit easier on a GM, and it makes it so the players have more fun, I think.
Yeah.
And then
a lot of people use Fantasy Grounds, like you said, even while playing in person, like, you know, using the 40-inch TV on the table type thing or whatever. Just because of that, not everyone can spend, you know, $1 million a year on figurines and Warhammer type castles and things like that. You know, so digital is nice, you know.
And then Roll20 I've used a couple of times with a couple of groups that I've played, and that in conjunction with Discord is also a really solid option if you're not looking to spend a lot of money. You can find most of what you need for source books and that sort of thing either by purchasing them from the game store or finding them online, and you don't need to invest as much as you would for a Fantasy Grounds subscription, all of the modules and all of those sorts of things. So there are options out there.
Roll20 also now has an API link with D&D Beyond, so you get all the core. Anything that you own on D&D Beyond will transfer over into the core rule set for Roll20 now.
Yeah, and I think that's important that a lot of the services for online tabletop games are employing now is linking things together.
Yeah, I mean, me
because
and Steven own how many copies of these
Oh,
books?
God.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you two walk.
I've
I
got
mean,
at
I
least
own
3 copies of the
12
Player's
books on
Handbook.
D&D
Yeah.
Beyond,
Yeah.
12 books on Fantasy Grounds, and
Yep.
0 actual books because,
and
well,
yeah,
they're all PDFs now.
eventually you get tired of buying the same book over
Yeah,
and over
yeah.
and over again every time you open a new system. So it's nice that they realized, okay, yeah, we get that you're supporting us, so we're going to make it a little
Mhm.
bit easier for you to have all of your resources available.
Right.
And that is wonderful, and I think it'll continue to get better
Mm-hmm.
as this unique situation continues.
And as we
Um,
learn things from it, yeah.
yeah. And that's actually another reason I like Fantasy Grounds. You can code stuff yourself as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
And they have a lot of built-in tools to help you make your own modules, make your own little parcels, items, characters, and you can code it all in to have that same ease of use that they have for the built-in module.
Right.
Yep.
And that also is something, if you put in a little bit of extra work as a GM outside the table, coming in, it's a lot easier to run things.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's one thing that's lacking, in my opinion, on Roll20
Mhm.
is the third-party community tools and things like that.
Right.
Comparatively to Fantasy Grounds, it's
Yep.
there is no comparison, in my opinion.
But yeah, that's all I really have for this. I think. Who's next?
I think I'm next.
I think
'cause
so.
I got a 12.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna be the dissenting opinion here. The main thing for me when I'm playing online is ease of use and accessibility, because the people that I've managed to bring into the fold of role-playing games have come from some non-traditional places, and in some cases, all they really have to play with right now is a phone. And maybe they have a set of dice because I will buy packs of dice to hand out to new players. So while I have played on Fantasy Grounds, and I agree it is a powerful tool, I do not like it. I actually started my online gaming career, sounds wrong, but it's the word I've got, on Roll20, and it was interesting because that was when I actually started playing Numenera, and the Roll20 system was built up to allow for a bunch of different games to be put in, and the first version of the Numenera character sheet on there was a bit hard to follow. So I got really good at navigating a suboptimal system in order to play online, because I didn't have many other people I could play with at the time. And as things have gone on, I have gravitated more and more towards either using Zoom, which the whiteboard feature is kind of all I need if I need to quickly sketch a map, because I don't use maps that often. And I use just straight up Discord, and I'll occasionally use the streaming function in Discord to show off, something that I'm drawing, or like a piece of art or something else. And in that case, we actually leave all of our cameras off, because a couple players in that group have some data issues, and they can't handle staying connected and getting audio at the same time as the bitrate you need for video.
Right.
I've even this is a one-time thing, but I even ran a game over just like a phone call. It was about an hour long, and we had one group huddled across the country, and me trying desperately to shrink down how difficult the system was to understand. And I managed to get some people who had never played and were about 12 years older than me to actually play in a very stripped down version of D&D. So online play can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And in my experience, and what I kind of want to continue with, the main important thing is, can you spend time with other people and communicate? Everything else on top of that is just bonus.
Icing on the cake.
Right.
Sure.
So keeping the barrier to entry low, especially like you're saying, to those new players that may not be familiar or as technically savvy.
Right.
That's also factoring into like the system choice that I go with, because I try not to introduce people to role playing via Dungeons and Dragons. I because there are a lot of mathematical steps for some people, and for some people I bring in, math is really not their strong suit, and having to keep track of, okay, I have all of these numbers and I need to remember like this number has to go here, and if you're not in the same location where you can reach across the table and say, no, this one, you want to use this one instead.
That's fair.
It's a lot easier to say, yeah, you keep track of, say, these three numbers and these two like just words, and if those words come up, you get a bonus, and if this number goes down, it's bad.
Hmm.
As simple as you can to get them into the shared fiction of role playing instead of the simulationist aspect of D&D.
Right.
And some of them have catapulted in like from that soft boundary layer into like deep D&D. One of them is playing Pathfinder now actually, and loves the hell out of it. But others have said, all right, that's kind of like the limit of how mechanical I want this storytelling experience to get. So yeah, I like that. I like that softer gray area for my online play.
Okay.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to be fairly brief since Rob Walker and I are all fairly of the same mind as when it comes to Fantasy Grounds. I will say that without online play through my couple of years of grad school, I would have gone insane. There's a reason I thanked you guys in my acknowledgments in my master's thesis. But there are a couple of tools that I find helpful with online play, and the first is Reddit. You can find so many thousands upon thousands of maps on even just the D&D map subreddit. And I don't know how... I've got 100 gigabytes of maps now on my desktop. That I will probably not even use half of them, but there will be a time when I just need one particular thing, and I can just search it and find it. And that's been incredibly helpful with online play. And I guess the second thing I'll talk about is kind of similar to what Fizzer said. As long as you're playing, it doesn't necessarily matter how you're playing. The learning curve, in all fairness, to Fantasy Grounds and Roll20 is pretty high. It took us, granted, all four of us have STEM backgrounds to a certain extent, so it's we can deal with a lot of the coding aspect of things with Fantasy Grounds, whereas a lot of people, that's definitely not one of the first things that they think about is, oh, I could code this, right? So it can be a bit of a learning curve, and if the best way for you to get playing is to just play with voice only in Discord and do everything Theater of the Mind is great. We all use Theater of the Mind to some extent or another. You don't need maps for everything. You don't have to show exactly what's going on. But if that's something that you want to do and your GM is interested in kind of striking up that balance and figuring out where things work best and how best to suit everyone, then great. But other than that, keep playing. Online, offline, however it works for you. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Definitely.
Any other comments on learning to cope with playing online from anyone before we jump into our last segment of today's session?
I will say that D&D Beyond just created a Discord-only D&D bot, Adray. So it handles all of your dice rolls, character stats. It integrates into D&D Beyond's mobile app and everything. You can play the entire thing on your phone if you wanted to, and it handles every single aspect of D&D in terms of the combat and ability checks and so on and so forth, all through Discord.
Right.
Just like a regular bot.
Right, so if you don't really care about the virtual tabletop and you just want something to keep track of what's going on, that's probably a great way to go. A little bit of a step in between just Discord and pen and paper and something more like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds. Thanks for calling that out. All right, we're going to jump into our last segment, our Roll Initiative segment. So we'll be right back. And of course, the title screen is up, but we can still talk. So,
Pee real quick.
as we're back, all right. See you in a second.
Goodbye.
Well, he automatically has disadvantage on initiative, I guess. That's how this works. Well, today's Roll Initiative segment, we are going to be discussing what I have been calling Game of the Week. Now, that probably doesn't mean what you think it means. We're going to be discussing game systems, in particular, outside of Dungeons & Dragons. And I think we've all talked about the systems that we're going to play already, sort of, to one extent or another.
I mean, I can't stop myself.
Yeah. I mean, I'm repping this system and whatnot that I'm going to be talking about. But we wanted to show what some of the other options are, and there are hundreds upon hundreds, thousands upon thousands of RPG game systems. And we'll probably do this segment again, a repeat of Game of the Week, in another 4 or 5 sessions, just to give a few more examples. There are great options out there. If you don't like Dungeons & Dragons, great. Find something you do like. I guarantee you can. But let's go ahead and roll initiative.
It's very hard to choose just one.
Yeah. I'm always digging into new systems, trying to find something interesting to play. But we're going to go ahead and roll initiative again and see who's going to be discussing first.
And I do have disadvantage.
You do have disadvantage, yeah. On brand for
Won't
today.
matter for me.
Oh boy,
Number
that's a
6.
I got a 2-2.
that's a 4 and a 5.
So you
I
have
have 6.
okay. So we have Rob, Walker, Fizzer, and me. Awesome. Rob, you're going first again.
Oh gosh,
rollers.
okay. So the system that I guess I'll be talking about is really the only other system that I've ever played with in great length. I mean, I've played the Star Trek system and stuff by Modiphius. Helped beta test that for you, Stephen. But I will be talking about Pathfinder, which I've already mentioned a couple times. Yeah. Quote unquote core rule book.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
huge.
I was gonna say that.
It's
that
literally one of the biggest books on my shelf. The only book that's bigger than this is
Add
my
about
Star
12
Trek
more books to
encyclopedia.
that.
Yeah.
You should get this side by side with the player handbook. And
Yeah, I've thought about it.
So Pathfinder is a very interesting system. Older than 5e. 5e was created kind of to make D&D more seamless and easy to get into right off the bat, because Pathfinder is extremely difficult. Which the difficult part is why some people love it, and that is there is literally a rule for anything you can think of. Hey, I want to break down this wooden door that has 3 steel bolts, some metal bars, and a wooden doorknob. Oh, let me go look that up. That's a DC of a 14 strength check, and there will be a check for it, a DC for it.
Okay, so I do simulations for my PhD, and I do not go into that much detail.
Yeah. That one book is probably one of 12 of total online, like its core rule set. But of course, you can go online and there are thousands of rules for how to play different scenarios. That's why I told you, like, Pathfinder actually does have a pretty interesting and pretty, I wouldn't say streamlined, but thought out way of doing ship combat. And so they have rules for things. They have jobs, like you mentioned, for different things, different parts of the ship, and all kinds of stuff. So I actually started my RPG life on Pathfinder on Roll20 way back in the day. But yeah, so one thing for me that I did like the aspect that there are rules for everything that can be a hindrance in some cases. Because when Gundar wants to break down a wooden door, I just say, okay, that's a strength check of 12, right? Whatever. Versus having to go look up the actual strength check for certain things. 5e definitely makes things more streamlined, if that makes sense. And Pathfinder can be a little bit daunting in terms of their character sheets. When I played, I had 3-page character sheets, I think. And so it could be very interesting. The class system is also very interesting in Pathfinder. There are a lot more subclasses for like rangers and different things like that, as long with a lot more homebrew. To be honest, a lot of homebrew things in Pathfinder. But overall, I think I'm happier playing 5e currently than I am Pathfinder. Just because I like the streamlinedness, and as Walker would probably agree, I enjoy telling the story along with all the other stuff. I don't really care about being super specific on. I just like to make things that make sense, you know, and that's how it should be, in my opinion.
Well, so I guess that means if you are interested in something that's a little more crunchy than Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder might be a good thing to take a look at.
Definitely.
All right, Walker, I think you rolled a 4, which puts you second in our initiative order.
Boy, one of those kind of days. So one of the systems I'm going to be talking about today is Call of Cthulhu. And like I said earlier when we were preparing for the show, I wish I had a skull to pull out of my little side shelf here. Because, as you may have guessed, it deals first and foremost with horror. And kind of the Cthulhu mythos of the best horror is the fear of the unknown. And it delves deeply into that, and it goes through basically the entire system of you're not so much creating characters that will get better and stronger and go and fight all these battles. You're creating investigators trying to figure out what the fuck is happening. And that's the goal. You're trying to figure out what's going on and either delay or stop it at the cost of perhaps your own life. Because it takes a big separation from D&D in the fact that you're not looking to go fight the monster. You're trying to make it so the monster never has a chance to appear, or you researched as much as you could to fight the monster and fight it on hopefully even terms. Because you are, if you're more familiar with D&D, there's the heroes that are up there, and then the common folk. You're one of the common folk. You're just a regular person with a couple of interests, maybe a couple of skills that realized something is wrong. You found a group of like-minded individuals, and at the cost of your own sanity and maybe your own life, you're going to investigate and try to solve this thing or make sure it doesn't destroy the world. So I like the horror aspect of it. I like that it's a game more focused on the investigation than the combat. And I love that because you can weave a complex story of cults and magic and weirdness in the woods and whatever you want to do, and make it so it's unique every time you do it. The other good thing about the Call of Cthulhu system is you can run it at any time period, because the rules themselves are set up in such a way that you can basically pick it up and place it in ancient Rome as easily as the 30th century. And all you have to change are the couple of weapons your guys have access to and your environment, and that's the basics of it. So it's one of those that has a lot of customization. And again, they kind of built their system around it on the character sheets. If you look at them, they have around 40 skills that the players have access to. And because of that, it gives you so many more options and your players so many more options of how they want to approach things. Because the general way that it works is encounter arises, you ask your players what they're trying to do to either get out of it, stop it, do whatever they're going to do, and they take a moment and think of what they're actually going to do. They have a list of skills that they're good at or bad at, and then they can either do a critical success, critical failure, moderate success, moderate failure, or just meh.
Is Call of Cthulhu the traditional Call of Cthulhu? Is that D20 based?
No, so it's based on percentile dice. The way it works is instead of rolling a d20 for a check, you roll your percentile, and based on your skill, you have to roll under your skill level. Let's say you have character sheet here I've got pulled up. You have a skill in archaeology. Let's say your skill is at a 60 because you were a professor or something like that, and you have a background in that information. You roll your percentile dice and you get a 59. Technically, that is a success, but it's the lowest level of success that you can get. Whereas if you rolled a 1, that's a critical success and you get more out of it.
Gotcha.
And then there's also a moderate success. The way you do it, I believe, it's been a little while since I've looked at this, is...
There's like a stat value that like shifts the interim.
Right.
Yeah, so, and you generally, the way they have it set up on the character sheet is you have the normal stat value, half of the stat value where you get that threshold of whether it's a heavy success or not, and then I think it's 10-20% for that critical level.
Right.
So there's a lot more of play in how the DM and the characters interact, as you can really weight how well they do or how poorly they do. And with a game where sanity is always on the table, that can mean a big difference.
That's important. Yeah.
That's another thing, is just seeing some of these monsters are enough to drive your characters insane. And you have to keep track of your sanity, manage it, and that's kind of how the game is played. Is you're trying to withstand enough that you can solve the problem, perhaps at the cost of your own life, because you're accepting that you will most likely die. You're a regular person and you're trying to stop mysterious otherworldly entities. So it's a higher mortality game for sure than D&D, but with that, I like it more because you feel more of that the
feel the
weight
reality
of your action. Yeah. And that's
good.
why I like it.
It's a very different central conceit than like D&D 5th edition,
right.
Pathfinder have, where like you're extremely squishy, and every response in the mechanics of the system feeds back to tell you you have very little power here.
Yeah.
And what little power is basically all coming from just what you have learned and the very small strength you have to enact change.
Right.
And the only like change that I've seen, at least from like my more outsider's experience, has been from bonding together and working with other people. That's the only way you can really change anything, which is honestly a very refreshing like response to get. Even if everybody dies, you know, it's still nicer to think that there's a mechanical representation of, if we're working together to the very core of this system, we'll be doing better.
And that's another thing that they play with the sanity system, is if you're slowly going insane, this trusted group member that you've had this entire time is slowly becoming someone else, someone that may be in opposition to what you're doing because of the things that you're doing, which is kind of weird in itself, but it's fun. It also allows you to improve, which I found is something that I don't exactly like the way D&D does it, where you get 4 levels, you get an ability score increase. What they do is little chunks at a time. What Call of Cthulhu does is, if you do well on a check at the end of your encounter, you can roll to see if you do better on that check in the future, and it adds to your percentage that you have to get to.
I like that.
So,
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, you can slowly get better at skills that you use often. You can, if you're really try to use skills that may not fit a situation to try to improve, but it may not go well. Little things like that, where you can make yourself stronger at the cost of yourself, perhaps.
Yeah, that makes me wonder if we could do some sort of adaptation. Since a lot of people play D&D, we could make it so every time you do an ability check on something that you're not proficient in, if you get a natural 20, you might get a small percentage of the way towards a proficiency. That'd be an interesting thing to think about, if that sort of system, or if we could create some sort of system that would allow that to work.
It would have to take a little work, because the way they do it in this is you have your threshold percentage of a success. And after you get that success at the end of the encounter, you go the other way. You have to get above your threshold and do better than you normally do to get that increase. So the better you get, the harder it gets to get continuous improvement. Yeah.
It'd have to be something that would be carefully tracked over the course of a session or an adventure or whatever you want to call it. But that could be something interesting to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how well that would fit in D&D with the way skills scale with level automatically, but it's something to look at.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of implemented something similar to that, Steve.
It's true.
When you
I had the system for allowing downtime
doing the downtime.
training
yeah.
in
You
skills and
guys
whatnot.
are going to be introduced to something that is actually what inspired me to do what I'm doing, but it's more of a cross actually between your idea, Stephen, and what you described, Walker,
Interesting.
with the chunking up. You guys have yet, despite my dearest attempts to get you to adventure into that and delve into that as of yet, but it will happen.
All right. Well, I think that's probably enough of Call of Cthulhu for the moment. Fizzer, shall we roll for our tide at 2?
Here we go.
That's a 5 if you can't read that.
I cannot, but I rolled a 1, so you're still going ahead of me.
Oh, okay.
Wonderful day.
Well, finally, something worked out. I am obviously talking about Star Trek Adventures, although based on what Walker, what you were talking about. Yeah, this is the deluxe edition core rulebook from the Board Cube bundle, which I had to buy because I am who I am. But Star Trek Adventures, Rob, Walker, and I had the honor of playtesting. I was running the games back in 2017. That was,
and there's some other people. Don't forget the other people.
Okay, there were other people, but of the three of us here, I might as well say that. And there are a few things that I really love about Star Trek Adventures. First, it really feels like you're involved in a Star Trek episode. It's one of the most of RPGs that are based on a piece of property, intellectual property. This is probably the one that has felt most right to me, at least as far as a normal campaign feels. And there are a few things that helped with that. First off was the character creation. It's absolutely fantastic. You do what they call life path character creation, and I know there are other systems that do this, but Modiphius in their 2D20 system, especially with Star Trek, did it well. You go through basically the steps of the character's life up until the point where the campaign starts. How did their parents' careers affect their choices? Did they rebel against their parents' careers or accept it? And depending on how they reacted, that changes their attributes. What track they went on at the academy. They might have minored in science, but they're a captain. And that really reflects quite well how the character gets to be in a position on a starship, on a starbase, whatever you call it. In addition to that character creation system, my absolute favorite thing, which I've somewhat adopted for D&D, is the extended tasks. They have a brilliant, easy system to handle trying to do something that requires more than one step. It doesn't necessarily matter if you get it all success right away up front. You can try something and fail, and then think of something new and try that. And as long as you get enough successes before you get failures, you win. Long story short. But that sort of system, at least how they do it in Star Trek Adventures, worked really well. And I remember some of the best moments we had in the games that we ran for about a year came out of some of those extended tasks. And as I was mentioning earlier, the ship-based combat in Star Trek is really fun. A few weeks ago, we ran the Kobayashi Maru scenario and had a blast dying because it's Kobayashi Maru. But
We got real close.
you did get real close. But yeah, a couple more Klingons were around that nebula, so that's how it works. But yeah, if you're a fan of Star Trek and you're at all interested in RPGs, the other great thing is this book is beautifully laid out. It looks like the standard... Well, that's not a great page to show. Hold on. Let's try that page. It has the standard Star Trek Lacar's system. The artwork is phenomenal, very evocative. And it's definitely something to check out if you're interested. And even if you haven't really delved into Star Trek, the first 3 chapters are entirely about lore. And it does it through... historical articles written in universe. It does it through somebody writing a letter to somebody else, and it's very effective at bringing you up to speed on what you might need to know. But yeah. Fizzer, would you like to discuss your game of the week?
Yeah.
Wonder what it's gonna be.
I can't shut up about this game. It's given me so much. So this came in the mail actually in the last week. This is Numenera Liminal Shores. It's another kind of a splat book for for the system. Numenera as a system is focused on the far-flung future, a billion years in the future. Multiple civilizations have risen to immense technological power and either vanished or destroyed themselves, ascended, suddenly transformed into fish. You don't know. But you are playing as humans in this far-flung future built on the wreckages of all of these prior civilizations. Immense technological power to the point that, at least to the modern sensibilities, everything around you looks like magic. It is a world built off of the Arthur C. Clarke quote, any sufficiently advanced technology could be indistinguishable from magic. And I love that because I like playing around with technology tropes, and the world sets it up for introducing all of these fantastical elements. At the same time, you can code things as, yeah, this is basically a robot, or this is like a gene editing sequence. But the people and your characters in the world don't get that. So they approach this, and all of a sudden, they do a handprint and blood is drawn, and all of a sudden a capsule comes up and a clone walks out. What is someone from like the Dark Ages going to think if all of a sudden a perfect copy of themselves walks out of a wall? You're going to ascribe some mystical shit to it, right? And Numenera lives in this wonderful gray zone between technology and fantasy, where each can be true at the same time, and all of the role-playing experiences you have in the world are built around exploration and trying to understand even another piece of the world. So that's why I like these splat books. Liminal Shore is one of the new ones, and I have the Numenera guidebook. I've got a Into the Data Sphere, and all of these books are focused on giving you a new place to explore. It's not it's not a book full of monsters. It's not a book full of adventure hooks. It has a mix of all of them tied into a central setting. And frankly, I'd buy it almost just for this art.
That is
because every time I look at another
every
time I look at another piece of Numenera art, I think, oh, I could build a session or two around just that image.
Yeah.
And they really work with the artists to make something that just inspires awe. And the system itself is really easy to run as a GM because I don't roll dice. The players roll all of the dice. There are only 3 stat pools to track, and everything beyond that is I say, all right, you know what? This is a very difficult task for you to undergo. Or, you know what, this monster has a bunch of metal plating on it. It's going to be hard to damage it. I'm going to say that is a difficulty level 5. What does difficulty level 5 mean? Multiply 5 by 3, you get 15. That is your target number on the d20. That is it. It's incredibly fast. So from the GM side, all you need to do is adjudicate, okay, that's hard, easy, not very easy, literally impossible, and then you set a number, and literally impossible is a level 10, which is a DC 30 on a D20, which is obviously impossible.
Yeah.
But there are ways that players can change the circumstances of the task, either by tools or being skilled at something, or one of my favorite aspects of the system, you can use what is called effort. You can spend points out of your stat pools to lower the difficulty because you're putting more of your effort, more of your endurance into reaching for that goal.
Sounds like Star Trek.
It's got a couple
automatically succeed at an impossible task if you put enough effort in and if you are prepared enough. It is a system where it is built so the impossible can become mundane through preparation effort, and discovery.
So the players really get out what they put into.
Absolutely. I have players who, once they try effort like the first time, they realize, oh, this is the way that I tell the GM how much I like or am interested in the outcome of this role. Which means I get to feed back on that and like, oh, you're really interested in this. All right, I'm gonna put more effort into the detail and like describe more of it. And what might have been like a kind of mundane exercise can like spiral into a really important character moment just from that simple mechanic. And I've had other players who have bounced off of it because, to their mind, your stat pools are also your health. So if you're spending points out of your health, then you're damaging yourself, and that doesn't make sense. And it's for some of them, they've just never come back to it. For others, it's taken some time of exploring with it and realizing, oh, okay, there's a different feel to putting things in for effort versus actually getting damaged in like 5th edition.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things when you first described it to me a year ago. I think that was one of the things that was difficult for me to figure out how that sort of balancing act worked. And unfortunately, we never had the chance to, or you never had the chance to run that for me. Just weird circumstance. But yeah, the way you've described it, that's definitely something. Very, very different system than 5th edition or Pathfinder. Has a few similarities with Star Trek, especially that sort of effort system. Star Trek has a momentum and threat. If you get better than you need on something, you generate momentum, which you can use to get better at something later. That definitely has some similarities to what you've described. But yeah, Numenera sounds like definitely an interesting game for that. Well, I think we're actually a little over time. I expected this to be a shorter session than last week, not a longer one, but hey, who knows? Does anyone have any last-minute comments on games, other game systems? Anything such as
Walker,
that?
you had that question about like how to do that smaller graded success thing, right? Okay, so because I cannot be stopped, I'm also working on my own pet project system to try and run superheroes.
Okay.
And I have been thinking about how to do this for so long. And I've come up with a way to maybe do it. I haven't been able to test it much with D6s. But I think this can apply to a D20 as well. When you're doing a contested roll in this system, there is a level of failure that can grow versus level of success. So normally, rolling a 6 on a d6 is a success, and rolling a 1 doesn't matter. But as soon as you go up against somebody else, if they're a normal person, then if you roll a 1, that counts as a failure, and you can add d6s as you go to increase the odds of you succeeding versus failing. Or you can expand your success range from a 6 to a 5 and a 6 to do the same.
And then do the converse on the other side if the opponent is stronger or better.
Then the failure range expands from 1 to 2 to 3, etc.
That's an interesting way to do that, yeah.
So on a d20, the way I think this might work is you have that similar like value. So this is a easy opponent, medium opponent, difficult opponent, and that creates a secondary threshold above the the DC that you would normally do. And if you succeed on the first one, that's a normal success, and if you succeed past that secondary, then that's the better success.
Right. Okay.
But then it's just one small number you need to keep track of, and it doesn't really expand the range of the D20 at all, and it allows for a little bit of a shift.
Okay. Yeah, to just be working
I might
out
suggest starting with like a +3 as the baseline, because
3
the
above
D20
the DC,
has a different it has a different range than a D6 does, and the granularity is shifted.
Yeah, I'll have to play around a little bit with the DCs there for different kind of situations and kind of work out the weight of difficulty versus skill, and with that, I think with the D20. But that's a good idea. Way to do it is have the threshold that's above to
Right.
get the success, and then the greater success, and then conversely you have a failure and a greater failure if
yeah.
it's, and that range would increase if you're against someone as opposed to the normal critical failure just being a 1.
Mhm.
Okay. I think I'm probably gonna play with that a little bit and see what I can come up with.
Have fun.
All right. Well, I just wanted to shout out one last thing that actually, Walker, you're talking about Call of Cthulhu made me remember. The game system Gumshoe is built around investigations. So in Call of Cthulhu, you can fail at an investigation. You can fail to find a clue that's important. The Gumshoe system is built around the thesis that you cannot fail to find a clue. And that's all built into necessarily, you might find the clue, but you might misinterpret it. You might find the clue, but you think it comes from a different source than it actually does. And so everything is built on the fact that when you're reading a mystery novel, the main character, the detective, is not going to fail to find something important to the story. And that's something really interesting. I actually have a copy of the Cthulhu version of that. I think it's Cthulhu Confidential, and it's a one-on-one version of Gumshoe. So that's something you might should take a look at.
Up to run that actually.
Yeah.
It sounds really fun.
I think it's something you'd like. It definitely still has a lot of the feel of Call of Cthulhu, but it runs very differently. So in general, that's the Gumshoe system, and there are a lot of fun things you can do with that. But it's something I've been looking at trying at some point in the future. So.
Okay, I'll definitely take a look into that.
All right. Well, I think that is about all the time we have left for today. We will hopefully be doing this a little more regularly every other Sunday. We'll see if we can still do the same time next Sunday, but we got to be a little bit flexible. People have lives. Go figure. But we will be keeping things posted on social media when possible. Additionally, next Sunday I will upload the YouTube video of today's session on our YouTube channel. The link to it should be the same name. GM support group should be able to find it pretty easily. And I will also include a copy of the item card that we created last week, or rather that Fizzer and Walker created last week, the Ring of Twinned Fates. So that item card, a picture of that, will be in the description of the YouTube video next Sunday. In the meantime, hopefully you all learned a little bit of something about some interesting ways to handle house rules, playing online, and maybe some other systems to try. And hopefully you enjoyed hearing us four GMs talk about RPGs. I know I enjoyed this chat. And we will see you all in, hopefully, 2 weeks. Goodbye.
Ciao.
Well.
Bye.